Hey everyone, it's Jason. Welcome to a beginning of the series for the Masters of the Universe, the board game, Clash for Eternia unboxing. Better known as He-Man, in case you're not familiar with the name Masters of the Universe. So there should be several different videos. I just got the full Kickstarter set. And of course, each video will be separate. We'll go through them all. And when I do start going through the base game here in this video, it will be a multi-parter. The first one will be going through all the, like I do with most of my unboxings, I'll be going through kind of the rule book, give a brief explanation of how the game is played, not meant to be a how-to-play guide, but so that way when we go through the rest of the components, you can at least have an understanding on what all the different stuff means. And then the next part after that will be actually going through all the miniatures and the cards and stuff like that. But yeah, we got just wanted to do a brief through of what we all have here. So we'll have the base game, Clash for Eternia, the Box of Power, which is all the Kickstarter stretch goals. Over here we have some smaller expansions. So we have She-Ra and the Great Rebellion, the Evil Horde, and the Wrath of Snake Mountain. So we'll get the other three teams, where the core set and the Box of Power have a lot of the other masters, or the good guys, or the evil forces, which is Skeletor's crew. We also have a small box down here for the assault on Castle Grayskull. We have some special Kickstarter 3D terrain we'll get a look at. And then if we kind of zoom up there, you can kind of see behind all my other mess, we have a giant Castle Grayskull. All the 3D stuff is just extra. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and scooch all this out of the way, and then we'll start taking a look at the actual game. Alright, so we're going to hop into the Clash of Eternia set. So I'm going to do a quick run through on what all the components are, and then I'll kind of start going through the book. And again, like I said, part 2 I'll start actually going through the actual characters and cards. So of course we're going to get a rule book, which will explain how to play, and scenarios. So before I even jump into the rule book, what is Clash for Eternia? It is a strategy miniatures battle game. Basically, you can one person is the player side, and they control each player. If you have up to 4 players, can each control an individual character. But you can play 1 to 4 players, so you can play any amount. One player can play as just one hero, so you could have just He-Man versus whoever, or you could have them team up and you could have 2 players, either number of characters out or number of players, versus the second player, which is the controller, which will control up to 3 different characters. Will always control 3 characters. I don't think you get an variable option in that one. And then you're basically fighting in different scenarios, trying to maybe rescue something, defeat the enemies, get these certain objectives, do various things like that across a hex tile board. And as you go through, you power up your characters, they gain more abilities. And there are 3 different ways to play, with 2 basic ways to play, either human player versus human player, or human player versus AI player. But it's nice because you can mix and match everything. So it doesn't always have to be good guys versus bad guys. You could have the 2 different, you could have the hero players sparring against each other. You could have 2 different factions. You could have the Horde versus Skeletor's evil forces. Of course, He-Man's Masters versus Skeletor's evil forces. Or you can even mix and match everything. You could have He-Man and Skeletor teaming up a bunch against some other guys. So it's a lot of very interesting stuff there. So with that being said, we're going to get 4 player boards. These are for the heroes. So you'll play your character cards, your level up skills, and then little spots for cubes to show that the power you've earned. And then you get 1 board here for the controller, which they'll put their 3 character cards up there, which will have their tokens. Then they also get 4 extra special abilities, which we'll go through during the rules. You will get this board, which is for an escalation player board. This basically explains how your characters are going to go through the bottoms, like a health tracker, and the controller and player spot will, so you can determine order, so your opponents don't know who's going to play what next. So that's kind of an interesting version of the mode. We are going to get the giant hex tile board, which I will open up in a minute, and we'll look at that. A bunch of tokens. So I have a ton of tokens for players. The hex tiles are ones that go on the board. You have some NPC characters, objective tokens, player versus controller tokens. They flip over. These guys here all have mystery spots, or scenario ones. You don't know which one it's going to be until you flip it over. Gotta try and find the correct Prince Adam, I guess. Then we're also going to get all these overlay tiles. So you have like some ruins that characters can enter, rocks they have to go up or around, water tiles, so some dazed status tokens. We flip these over. They're double-sided, so you can have forests or more rocks instead. And the terrain will be stuff either your characters, again, will have to go over, go around, making the map change every time. And then just when we get some more, we have some boulders in there, some different shapes for the rocks and ruins, and then they flip over, and there's also a lake. So this is a way that basically each game and scenario can be very different using the same general map and components, because you'll have the same overall size board, but based on where you put all these different tokens and different tiles will change up how the map will look every time. We will get a baggie of tiny power cubes. To keep track of your skills, we will get 12 dice. Basically so that one side can have one side can have the other, so that you're not fighting over having to pass dice around all the time. Then the next thing we'll have is a bunch of small cards, regular size playing cards, which will explain how like the terrains work. Player age, minion cards, and then some, well, back here we got strategy cards for the AI. So you're playing against them, they'll get to do their special actions. So we have all those. If I can dig these out. We have a bunch of tiny cards here. These are your activation cards. So like on the backs here, they'll either have player or controller. So basically you're going to play these face down. And then your opponents won't know who you played first. They won't know when you played Evil Ling versus when they played Beastman. So that way they can't, as you're trying to determine your strategies amongst yourselves versus seeing what your opponent does and then do that. And then we have a bunch of special ability cards. So pretty much every character has 3 of these, and they're double-sided. And they have different colors on there. Red, yellow, and green for different skill levels. So like first, second, third level. So as you level up your characters, they gain extra abilities. And you have 2 options. So there's a lot of variable options to make your characters. And then we also have some special cards for the controller player, so they can do extra different things on their turn because they don't have as many characters. And then the last thing we have in here for cards is we have the actual character cards. So we'll have big size for the player to play as, gives them special abilities they can use, their health. On the back side of every one of these is the controller side. So if I'm playing as Man at Arms as one player, the controller can't play Man at Arms as well. So you can't have clone battles, unfortunately, unless you buy a second game. And also there's only 1 miniature, so that makes sense. And then there's also a set of AI cards, which are by themselves, which have different little abilities, but they share a lot of the same effects. And when we actually get into the set, we'll look over all of them, all the abilities. Then the very last thing in here is the box of miniatures, which we're just going to get to see all the fun silhouettes now. But yeah, there's 6 heroes, 6 bad guys to begin with, plus a bunch of miniatures. And we'll look at that in the part 2 video. Alright, so that's the basis of all of our different components. I'm going to set all of these things off to the side, and we'll kind of pick them back up and look at them as we go through the video. So I'm not trying to pop all my tokens out. You guys scoot there. I just knocked a bunch of stuff on the floor. So like the first thing I mentioned was we have the board, which is the full play area. So this board is pretty big. So I don't know if I can get all of it in my camera in one shot. So yeah, it's a very big board. Lots of textiles at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 across by 15. Yeah, so that's basically how your hex tiles will work. On there, you fold this out, and then as you're playing around, your characters will move around the board. And if we have, for example, one of these tiles, you place it on the board like so. And then now it's a thing where your characters, the different miniatures have to go around, or again, you can flip it over, rotate them different directions. If you have multiple, you of course can link them together to create even a bigger forest for more obstacles to go around, or you'll do stuff like that. So that's going to definitely change up how the gameplay of all that stuff works. I'm going to zoom my camera back up a bit. Now, I'm going to put the actual board away. Underneath this, I do have what's like an identical playboard. This is the Kickstarter exclusive neoprene mat, which folds out, but it works the exact same way. Tiles are the exact same size. I'm just going to have this out to look upon, just so if you're wondering what that is. And I'll talk a little bit more about that during the Kickstarter unboxing stuff. Alright, to actually look at the instructions, so here's a list again of all of our different components. The actual book is kind of nice there. It breaks down where if you need to find something, there's actually a chapters list. I don't see that in a lot of instruction books, so that's very helpful. Also, the way this is laid out is kind of fun, because you have Prince Adam talking. You know why it's Adam and not He-Man, but then occasionally you have Skeletor talking as well. But yeah, the overview of the game is a group of teammates team up against a solo player or AI, each controlling a number of heroes and villains. As the game progresses, heroes and villains grow in strength, unlocking exciting skills and abilities. Each game is a single scenario. Each scenario has a unique objective. Each side must complete the first to accomplish wins their scenario. So yeah, that's kind of a fun, different way to play. Now, there's no campaign mode, so anyone that's hoping to be like, hey, I can play this from start to finish, there's not. I mean, you can kind of link, if you play this in order, you can kind of link them as a story, but there's nothing in there that's like, if you win this game, as the Masters, you get to do this extra thing. If you win as the evil side, you get to do this. That would have been really fun to have a little scenario campaign, and maybe if they retain this IP, that could be something they can add in the future. But they didn't. So, alright, basic concept. We have skills, which are used for paying. Abilities, how much they cost, what they do. We have little power tokens, which are what you use to pay for everything in the game. So anytime you want pretty much use an ability, you're going to have to pay these power tokens. And then, of course, there's a character side. We went through some of this a little bit. Player side, controller side. Now, I'll break down the skills a little bit more. Activation cards, skill cards, HP tokens, all the stuff you start with. Various terrain. And then the tracker board. So, the beginning of the game will basically look like this. So, here's a scenario setup. You have the tracker board on the side, which is shared amongst both sides and both players. Keep track of like the HP, where you're going to put guys who activate want. Terrain, like extra rule cards off to the side, so if someone's like, wait, how does this work? Very simple. Then each character starts with their base character. Each player starts with their character card, their skill cards, off to the side, and the controller has all on one board. So that's why this can easily be, it could be a 1v1, again, one player could control all three characters, or you could have three people controlling here and one person controlling that side. So if you want to play a 4-player, and again, there's actually 4-player boards, so you could have a 5-player game very easily, 5v1. I don't know if it actually specifies that on the box or not. Yep, and then the controller setup is basically like this. They're going to have your special controller skill cards, your 3 characters you decide to play as, plus your minions for that group. Base set contains 1 minions for good side, 1 for evil side, but the expansions will add more, so if you are looking at picking up different ones. And there's the health escalation tokens. Escalation basically just being for, as the game goes on, certain things happen. This meter will move down when it hits certain spots. The green, yellow, and red. All the characters are getting extra abilities, which is really fun. Then round overview. So let's go ahead and jump into this. We're going to just kind of hop right into how the game plays. Order phase is starting point during each round. Both controller players determine the order in which their various characters will activate the round. This is done with activation cards and the tracking board. Player team can place their activation cards in respective spots in the order which their characters kept hitting until their time. So if you have one character, so if I'm the player and I have one character, obviously you'll know who's playing because they will have all 4 slots. You have 2 characters, then each player gets stacked twice. 3 characters, you have each character gets 1 card, then you have any player. You have 4 characters, 1 for each. So you're always going to fill up all 4 slots on the board. It just depends on how many you decide to play. So it says, controller always has 4 cards, 1 for each of their chosen characters, and a strategy. But a team player can have a variable amount. So the side you're fighting is always going to have at least 3 characters. But the player side, who gets each individual characters have their own abilities and skills, you can play 1 to 4, depending on maybe how difficult or what the story determines. Because you feel like there's a lot of times in the cartoons where He-Man does stuff by himself. Or maybe you have an episode where it's, He-Man teaming up with this person, or Man-at-Arms and Teela doing something. So they kind of let you represent that. Yep, so basically this is explaining how they all work. So, like, the controllers go ahead, place their 4 characters down, starting on the spot that say controller. So you as a controller know it's Skeletor, Beastman, the strategy, and then Merman. But the other player doesn't know who's going to attack, so they don't know who they should be avoiding first or who they should be dodging. And then the same way the players play there. They play He-Man, Man-at-Arms, Orko, and Stratos. So then the controller player doesn't know who, which order is what either. And then the board will be filled up. And that's pretty much simple on how that works. Then during the activation phase, characters gain power. At the start of a character's turn, they gain power At the start of a character's activation, they gain the amount of power listed on the activation slot on the tracker board, just above the activation card. So we're going to go ahead and just take a quicker look at that. So this is what that escalation board looks like. So it's always controller always gets to go first, then player, then controller, and it goes back and forth. But then the little lightning symbol at the top is the power. So whoever the controller plays first doesn't gain any additional power to spend, but then the first player gets 1, and then controller gets 1. Then player gets 2, controller gets 2, player, so on and so forth. So the last player action gets, basically because they've been waiting longer, resting essentially, they're going to get more energy to spend. That's sort of the idea behind it. But it's also a good strategy for where you want to put your stuff. Maybe He-Man's going to do the most damage, and you want to put him out front, so he can attack first before the other characters have a chance to move around and do stuff. But that also means he's only going to gain 1 power. So he's not going to be able to, if you do that every single turn, he's not going to be able to perform his best abilities because he's not going to earn enough power to save up. But on the other hand, you don't always want to keep putting him in the end because if he always has 3, yes, he might be able to perform some powerful attacks, but if he's always way at the far end, he might keep having to spend every single turn just trying to catch up and move around and never getting actually use their attacks. So it's kind of, that's the strategy portion comes in. You have to decide when it makes sense to put people for how much energy they need to perform their skills versus when you need them to be able to attack. So in step 2 in the activation are perform actions. Once they've gained power, time for a character to perform action. A character may perform up to 2 actions during their turn. Same action can perform multiple times. Just have to complete it. So you can attack, make one attack against any character in sight, interact with a special object, move. A character performs a move. They move up to 3 spaces on the battlefield, going from their current space to an adjacent space. They can freely move through spaces containing allies, but they may never end in the same space. Models may never move through spaces containing enemies or certain pieces of terrain, like you can't move through a rock. You could try and climb over, or like a wall. If there's a wall, you can't move through a wall. Probably a better idea. If a character moves out of a space with enemies, they take escape damage. You can use your skills, so your skills require an action to be used. And then you have bonus actions. Sometimes skills or effects give characters bonus actions. Do not count against the 2 actions a character can perform during their turn. But each one can only be activated once. Once a character has completed their 2 actions or chooses to pass, their activation ends and the next card in the activation track. So that's basically, you gain power, you either move, attack, do a skill, do something. Single player gains a little extra bonus just because they're by themselves. Then we have the strategy activation. Strategy activation functions a bit different than character activation. So this is if you pull up the card that actually says strategy activation on it. Let me see if I can find that card. So heroes can always have an option of having the any player card, which will always be for the player system. And then it's going to, of course, be the last card stuck in the bottom of the box because it's the one I want to look at. Alright, 1 second. Alright, so the controller player, which, I mean, can be good guys or bad guys. You can use either side, because, again, they'll have their backside, the player or controller side, so either team can play. So, the controller side is not always the bad guys, but they'll always have this extra strategy card, which will just say controller on the back. So when this comes up, so instead of one of the characters getting to activate, they actually draw a card from this special strategy deck, which will have various other things they get to do. Ambush, yield. So yeah, they get extra little effects in there. So when that comes up, it says, unlike character activation, power gain during the strategy activation is allocated to the 4 skills on the controller board. This power may be split as you wish between skills. They not all have to be allocated into the same skills. So that's saying that here on their board, this is the controller board. Let's see if I can kind of zoom down a bit. We'll get a little bit better look at that. So if I have my 3 controller characters, which I don't know why we have Skeletor at the end, but what that's saying is if I've gained extra power, so during my character phase, if it's Beastman's activation phase, I give him an extra power token. So now he can use that towards his abilities on his turn. If it's the strategy phase, I put it on one of the ones at the bottom. So depending on which one I want to have, like I could put it down here to reserves, so I can spend 3 on that and use that better reserve ability, or different reserve ability, not necessarily better. It says activate minions. Each minion on the battlefield is activated 1 at a time. When a minion activates, it performs 1 action, followed by its 1 attack action. It can only perform these actions and must perform them in that order, although they may forfeit either of these actions if they want. Like, a minion doesn't have to move if it doesn't want to and just attack. So, each team, again, will have 1 set of minions. They'll have elite minions as well that can be gained throughout the game, versus various things like Beastman has the ability to summon the Shadow Beast back here. Yeah, so they're in the first other 3 phases of the controller. They get to activate one of these 3, depending on when they do it. Whenever they activate strategy, then they use the minions instead. And it says activate controller skills. Once all minions have activated, the controller may now activate controller skills, assuming they have enough power. So that's when they then get to activate these. You can see like, some of these have, maybe not as because it's a glare, but this one costs 3, 3 and 2, 2 and 1, and 1 and 1. So if you don't put points right away in battle plan, your first turn, you might not be able to activate anything else. If you drop it in command or reserve, you try and build them up, it might take 2 or 3 turns to get around to even be able to use one of them once. So you're not going to necessarily always use one of these skills every single turn, just based on how much power you have. That's fairly simple there. Then as for power, I'm going to zoom my camera back up a little bit here. So the powers are represented by power cubes. There are 2 primary ways characters gain powers. When they activate based on their tracking order and through attacking. So while attacking, if you roll a certain dice, you'll get that. We'll get to that when we attack. When a player character gains power, is immediately assigned to an empty power slot on a hero card on any unlocked skill. Controller gains power, immediately assigned to any of their controller skills. So yeah, when the controller gains its power, it always goes to the bottom down here. So I actually did say that wrong. So during the player's turn, when they activate, they put their power down here. Alright, sorry about that. I was just taking a second to reread this. So they do make this sort of confusing. So when a player character, whoever has the single dashboard, like He-Man's here, gains power during their activation phase or whatever other reason they gain it, they have to put it to one of their slots. So then, but whenever a controller gains power, it immediately assigns it to an empty power slot on their controller skills. So they point this out, showing like it should be one of the bottom ones, but it depends on how they gain it. Basically, like if it's activation wise, they still put it with the character up at top. So again, if Evil Wing activates, she gets a cube on her spot here because she's activating. That's hers. But if they gain it a different direction, then they put it on the bottom down here. And it says controller characters now have individual skill cards instead their skills are on their board. So they can't, they don't assign it to Mind Control or Dark Magic. They just assign it to Evil Wing, and she can spend it however she needs to. I actually have AI cards out, and I just realized that. I don't even have the actual character cards out. So let's just swap out some character cards instead. There, that's what they actually are supposed to look like for the controller cards. I had AI cards out instead, which function a little bit differently. But yeah, so they have their different abilities on that they can do. So you can see like lots of them will have, most of these will have, and we'll kind of go over these, but they have reactions or attack boosts which are added on. So like Evil Wing can still do Dark Magic, and then she can boost it if she wants to spend her energy, but she doesn't have to. But if she wants to use Mind Control, she has to spend 2. So they're usually not limited to be able to not attack. It's just if they want to do something additional, they can spend their points. And that's sort of the whole idea with them. Is they'll always have something they can do, and they can save up their points to basically make their attacks more powerful, or do special attacks. And then they have the controller skills down here, which they can also spend to do different things. Alright, so before I get too far into that, let's look at a hero board. So we're just going to kind of slide all these guys up. And look at one of the player boards. So here we have He-Man set up. So at the beginning of the game, He-Man won't have any of these skills. So every time he uses one of his power attacks, sort of power or abdominal, that's what he does. He can gain points for his activation. He puts it down here. So you want to spend these somewhat frequently. Then as the escalation goes up, you'll slowly unlock these skills. So if you don't currently have these bottom two, then you can only assign points to basic He-Man or his first skill. And then as you gain each one, you can start assigning them more and more. And that gives you more and more options on where to spend abilities or attacks. But like this, you'll always have, again, like the controller characters, He-Man's Sword of Power will does three dice worth of damage. But then it has an attack boost. So if you want to spend points, you can, but you don't ever have to, so you can kind of gain them up. But then when you start getting up into some of his other ones, like Throw, you have to spend a point to do that every time. So some of his side abilities, you're going to have to spend, you're not going to be able to use every single turn either. And that's just basically, this is explaining your escalation skill. So as you hit each of these spots on the board, they all gain an additional escalation point. The other thing that'll happen, the two other things that'll happen, are every time you hit one of those escalation points, besides the player character getting to pick, one of the two sides of their next ability they'd like to unlock, the controller character gets to flip over one of their skill cards here to a more powerful version. So they unlock and get stronger that way. And then each of the actual characters has an empowered ability, which can get unlocked as well. So you could, put a little cube on there as a reminder. And then now they get an additional ability too. So you can unlock, as you unlock your first three things, each of your characters will get unlocked, as well. So it says, the, controller doesn't gain new skills as a game. Their 4 characters improve, and their characters gain the empowered. Each time one of the advancing spaces reach, at the same time a player chooses new skills, the controller chooses one of the skills on the dashboard, flips it to its empowered side. They then select one of their controller characters, place a power cube on the side, and now gains this effect till the end of the turn. Now, there's only 3 escalation spots, so by the end of the game, all 3 of your controller characters will have empowered, but only 3 of your 4 abilities. So you have to kind of decide which one you maybe are using the least amount. Alright, then we can look at what attacks are. Attacks are either melee, only line of sight in adjacent spaces, or ranged within 4 spaces of the line of sight. Now, how you pay for them is kind of interesting. So I'm going to move this back up. We're going to look at He-Man here again. So if you want to do them, you have to select and pay for the cost. You have to pay for everything, say what you're doing, pay for it, then select a target who's valid. Then you can pay any attack boost you like. And then you can play any, if that player who you're attacking has a defense boost, they can do all that. So, before you even roll the dice to see if the attack succeeds or fail, you can apply all these extra effects. And since you're applying all your attack boosts first, the defending player can decide whether it's even worth them wasting points to defend against it. So kind of what this means is we're going to look at He-Man's card here. He has Throw 3. It's a melee range, so it has to be next to a character. So he has to spend 1 point to throw. And it just pushes enemies wounded by his attack up to 2 spaces. Now, if he had a second cube, like currently he only has 1, so he can't even play his attack boost. But if we had given him 2, he could opt to spend that attack boost. It says if that enemy ends adjacent to another enemy, perform a 3 range attack on that adjacent enemy. It cannot generate power. So what that could what that would mean is, if you know that like I'm going to throw it and you're going to be able to throw up to 2 spaces, that character's going to hit somebody else, I could spend my attack boost and do an additional 3 attack on that second character, essentially using that character I'm throwing as a weapon. And then now that would give the opponents an option to use a defensive ability. So, for example, if I had Trapjaw here, he has Metallic Body, which has pay 2 for defense, roll 3 dice for each sword, and then gain 1 defense. So you could potentially gain up to 3 defense to dodge against that attack. But because I would have the option to see, hey, they're throwing Evil Wing, if he's not going to hit Trapjaw, I don't have to waste my points doing it. If he's going to hit Trapjaw, I can wait to see if he spends that first. Oh, he is going to throw that, and he's going to do an attack against me. Then I can decide if I want to spend my 2 points. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic there. Then you roll the dice. So for each sword you get during a melee attack, it generates 1 success. Each target during a range attack is 1 success, and each Castle Grayskull, regardless of the type of attack, is 1 success. Additional, after completing the attack, the attacking character gains 1 power for each Grayskull rolled. Sometimes you'll add extra. So this is an extra way, so basically you can spend power. You could potentially gain more power. Now, there are no actual empty or missed sides on the dice. It's one of these 3 symbols. But if I'm doing a melee attack, every range is considered a miss. Or if I'm doing a ranged attack, every melee is considered a miss. Or if you're doing the defensive ability, it's like only if I get swords. The skulls don't count towards that because it's not an attack. Unless that works for defense, I have to double check. But I don't think anything ever said that. Then it only counts what it's looking for. Then you tally success. Once the attack dice have been rolled, tally the number of successes generated based on the die result. Every success becomes 1 wound to the defender. Then subtract armor, so any character have armor, like we just said. Trapjaw can gain up to 3 armor. And then you apply the wounds. So, fairly simple there. You have multiple targets, so if you have something that's going to hit multiple characters, you just roll once for everything. If you're KO'd, minions are KO'd, are just removed, and can, then they can come back via skills later. And they usually have 1 or 2 hit points. They're not very strong. But characters KO'd, they're only temporary out of the fight. If a character is KO'd during their next activation, they're placed on a friendly spawn token, and then they perform activation as usual. So, I don't know. I'm a little off on that as being an effect. Because basically it's like, I rush in with He-Man into the middle of the forces. He gets KO'd. During his turn, gets KO'd during a turn. Next turn, he has to start farther back on the board. But he gets to start back immediately. There's no, other than having to re-go a distance, there's no penalty. Now, I don't know exactly what the penalty could be. I would say at least they should have, my thought, you should at least have to lose some of your power, maybe not all of your power, because that might be way too big of a you already died and you have to get back to maybe across the board, which could take a while, depending on where you died, or got KO'd. But I feel like you should at least lose a power point or something, or maybe your next activation when you recover has you have to be the last activation. So there you could maybe almost be hey, they lose all their power, but they have to start on or they lose all their power maybe from 1 skill or something, lose some amount of power, but maybe have to start the last activation. So it's making them not just spend that. So they have to spend that entire next turn recuperating, essentially. But they still get to play that turn. I think that would have been a better idea. Because ideally what it could be is He-Man could act last, or could act second to last, or he could act, whenever during a thing. But he could get KO'd by the last, he could be the last character, he could be the last player card. Whatever. He gets KO'd on the last end of the round, the last action. Maybe someone does a rebound attack or something. And he gets KO'd. He could come back and be the first character that starts the next turn. So it's he literally got KO'd, and then he's immediately back up attacking the next turn. So it's a little wonky. Then we have Daze. Some attacks affect Daze the defender. Now becomes Daze, place a Daze token next to it. Daze token is moved onto the model until they recover. They do not have benefits of armor and move 1 less space. And except for During activation, a model may spend 1 power to recover being dazed. So you have to spend some good. So here's an example of an attack. So it says Skeletor has Life Siphon. I have such glare, I have to move my table. Life Siphon has a range of 4, so that means he gets to roll 4 dice. That's what the number means. He rolled a sword, a target, a grayskull, and a grayskull. So he got 3 successes, 1 from the target and 2 from the grayskulls, and 1 miss. But he also gains 2 powers because he rolled 2 grayskulls. So those 3 would be dealt to Tila, but she has armor. So her armor value is 1, she blocks 1, so she only takes 2 damage. So you move her HP token 2. Very simple. It's not very difficult combat. Then we have the battlefield. Just different terminology. Spaces are each hex elements. Refer to anything on the thing. Adjacent, within, move, push. Yeah, so checking distances, moving. Very, very simple stuff. Then there's the escape damage. So anytime a model moves out of a space with enemies, they suffer 1 wound for each enemy. This happens every time they move 1 space, meaning it can happen multiple times during a move. So, if Man at Arms leaves the hover robot, he takes 1 damage. If he leaves and there's 2, he takes 2 damage. Now with this one, if he moved 1 here, he'll take 1 damage from leaving this spot. But then if he moves here, he'll take an additional 2 for leaving both of their spots. And then he'll probably still have to take at least a 3rd one to deal with that. So running away is not necessarily a good option, depending on how you do it. But maybe you have to take that point of damage from a minion to get closer to take something out. Or, like if you moved here, take that 1 damage if you had a swirling attack that could take out both of them. Line of sight's pretty explanatory. You can't see through certain objects. It's saying, like, he can see A because he's right next to it. He can see B because there's nothing in the way. He can't see C because there are rocks in this rock terrain which blocks the line of sight. And he can't see red because he'd be crossing through the ruined terrain. So yeah, if you can't see from one tile to the next, anything's in the way, it automatically blocks it. Then we have terrain, which have their own cards. So each terrain has matching rules listed. Many terrain requires models to pay additional movement to leave or enter. So yeah, these some skills and rules might interact with terrain penalties. So, for example, Merman can move through water without a penalty because he's a mer character, and some other ones have things like that. So you're saying if a hover robot wishes to enter the forest and perform a move action which grants 3 movement points, to enter he must pay 2 movement points, spend 1 to move, 1 to enter the terrain penalty, and then after that he can move 1 more space because he has 3 points. But now down here, which I didn't catch until I reread the instructions here, a multi-piece forest placed next to each other. So all spaces are in the same forest, so he only needs to spend the 1 point to enter, and then the extra point to exit. So, like, well, as long as he's in there, he can move around freely. It says if the game effect requires placing a terrain and there are no pieces of that type available, an existing one may be moved instead. So if all your guys are concentrated up in this top corner and you're supposed to place an additional force, you could take one from farther down in the stage where nobody's at. Alright, then we have the last little bit of stuff in here. We have scenarios. Scenarios are broke up into 3 types. Open sides means either side controller or player can choose any faction. Set sides, which are usually more narrative and story based. And then AI scenarios are specifically made to be utilized by player versus AI mode, though they can be controlled as both sides. You can play it the other way, but they're kind of designed to work for the AI. Sort of similar if they don't say AI. You could potentially use the AI in those scenarios, but they might not work exactly because it might like what one side needs to do, the AI might not be able to figure out or do appropriately by itself. A good idea example might be if there's an escort mission. The AI is basically just supposed to move and attack whatever is nearest to it, so it might not have this. It might not work directly in them rules for it to grab something and pull it away, or to defend a certain piece if it's supposed to be defending it. AI is probably more if it's just like, you need to defeat this character type of idea. Different escalation triggers, victory conditions, special rules. There are some non-playable characters in the game you can get, which just do extra special things. And then there's finally the AI mode, which is just a special setup. So for the most part, the AI sets up just like normal, except you get a special AI character activations. They have special attacks and skills on their board. Yeah, so it says, players have selected characters. They select 3 characters from the controller AI, choosing like they would a standard game. Each character has a special AI version of their character card. Take both the character AI activation, AI strategy activation decks, and shuffle them separately. Take the AI power token and place it on the 0 space of the HP tracker. So then their order phase up here. At the start of each order phase, take the activation cards for 3 AI characters and the single controller strategy card, shuffle them randomly, and place them in the controller space on the order track. At the end of each order phase, take the AI character activation strategy and shuffle them around. So basically, yeah, you're not sure which one's going to activate, but it's the same thing. So you're going to use the controller cards, for the AI characters, essentially. But then they're going to have special decks. So each AI card lists various actions the actions the character will attempt to perform. And if they can't do the first one, then they go to the second one. I'll go into a little bit more detail when I go over the AI characters. But then they also have strategy cards they try and do as well. But yeah, it's very interesting. And then there's a full thing about all the different skills and die symbols and on the back. Alright, so that's our basic for the game. I know it was kind of rough for me to go through. We're going to take a quick look at the scenario book. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we just want to have a quick look at these. So they're going to show in the beginning of the index if it requires a specific group, which are your set sides, the purple one, or if it's an AI, or if it's an open. As you can see, there's only 4 AI scenarios listed. But there's a lot. Again, you could potentially use them with anything, but I think they're more just meant for verses. So we have this is a rescue. KO player characters 3 times, or the NPC. The NPC is KO'd, and for the players, complete both conditions to win. Claim all 4 scenario tokens, or have the NP escape. Special AI rules. Other special rules and stuff for when the escalation will actually trigger. And then there's kind of how the map is laid out. So it shows what terrains go where the tokens go. The P and C tiles are where are basically your spawn points. So the C's are where the controller spawns. The players all start in the far corner. So yeah, different things like that. You can see how some of these different maps will change each time. You can get overlays that'll be right next to each other. Make some different strategies. This one all surrounded. Yeah, but I mean, there's only gonna be so many options because you only have so many pieces. But yeah, you can make some definitely fun, different layouts with all these. Here you have some ruins that you have to go through with boulders in between some of the doors. So you can't get through them unless you move them. There we go. That's our scenario. Alright, so that's what I have for the first video. The second video, we'll actually start looking at all the different cards and all the different abilities. I'll explain how those all work. So see you guys then. Bye.